again, we've got to go back and put some of this in context. It really began, the crisis heated up in May after the United States canceled the waivers to various countries to continue buying Iranian oil. The Iranians had threatened that if the United States conducts this kind of economic warfare against Iran, then Iran will retaliate. They didn't say how. Some Iranian officials have said they're going to shut down oil flows through the Gulf of Hormuz. The Gulf of Hormuz, about 25% of international oil trade goes through the Gulf of Hormuz. The Iranians can easily shut that down, and they've threatened to do so. In May, 4 tankers were attacked in that region. Minor damage to those tankers. But then recently, 2 more tankers were hit. A Norwegian tanker and a Japanese tanker were hit. It's interesting, the nature of the attacks. First of all, the United States claims that they were destroyed with limpet mines, which the Iranians display openly in their military parades. So it's like the use of Novichok in Britain. Why would the Russians choose to kill or attack the Skripals with the one chemical weapon that only Russia controls? It was very, very strange that such a thing would happen. Well, now the U.S. charges that these tankers were destroyed with these limpet mines that the Iranians control. The evidence that the U.S. has provided is some video footage, supposedly of an Iran Revolutionary Guard boat crew taking a limpet mine off of the hull of one of these tankers to eliminate the evidence of Iranian involvement in this. Nobody knows if this is true, if this is an Iranian operation. The Pompeo immediately accused the Iranians of doing this. Then the U.S. government says that the Iranians did it. Then Mohammed bin Salman in Saudi Arabia says the Iranians did it. We don't know. The Europeans have said that that there is some evidence of possible Iranian involvement, but it's not overwhelming 100% kind of evidence that they're convinced has been proven about this. We do know that there's countervailing evidence. Yutaka Katada is the president of the Japanese company that controls the Japanese tanker that was hit. He says that the crew there told him that they're certain it was hit by a flying object. It was not a mine that destroyed that. Who are you going to trust if you have to choose? Mike Pompeo, who's a lying spokesperson for the Trump administration, which has told, according to the Washington Post, 11,000 lies since it's been in office, 11,000 certifiable lies. Trump lies over and over again every day. Are they going to be trusted? Or are you going to trust the Japanese tanker president? The Iranians, are they to be trusted? No, they're not to be trusted either. The Iranians aren't good actors. The fact that the United States is not a good actor doesn't mean that our foes in the region are good actors. There are no good actors in the Middle East. The Saudis, Mohammed bin Salman, his bone doctors who go in there with their bone saws and cut up Khashoggi's body. The Emiratis, what they're doing. The Saudis and the Emiratis are conducting war, as we know, in Yemen, in what's being widely considered around the world the worst humanitarian disaster in the world. They're starving the Yemenis to death. They're bombing on a regular basis. These people are to be trusted? Of course not. So there are no good guys in this fight right now. So we don't know who's responsible. There's evidence on various sides, but what we do know is that there are members of the Trump administration who are itching for an excuse for war with Iran. Bolton has been saying the United States should bomb Iran for more than a decade. He was one of the leading architects of the invasion of Iraq, the fabrication of evidence of weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. Pompeo has been also calling for military action against Iran. Another one who just can't be trusted. Every time he opens his mouth, you have to be suspicious that he's going to be lying. And so they're using this clearly as a pretext. So back in May, Trump used the attack, blamed it on Iran again, and sent the aircraft carrier strike group to the Persian Gulf, sent bombers to the Persian Gulf, sent 1,500 more U.S. troops to the Persian Gulf, again, preparing for some kind of military operation there. And then last week, Trump announced that he's sending 1,000 more U.S. troops to the Persian Gulf. The situation is heating up by the hour. Last night, a U.S. drone was shot down by the Iranians. The Iranians said it was flying over Iranian space. The U.S. says that it was over international space. Both sides are accusing each other. The rhetoric is heating up. More and more people, military officials and ex-military officials in the U.S. are saying that military action is required. What does that mean? Iran has allies too. You know, the U.S. has its allies who are pushing for U.S. military action. Iran is allied with China. It's allied with Russia. It's allied with Iraq, really. I mean, there are a lot of ways. Iran has military assets throughout the region, in Lebanon, in Syria, in Iraq. So Iran has capabilities. And the United States thinks that a war with Iran is going to be easy. It's in for a big surprise. According to Colonel Larry Wilkerson, Colin Powell's former chief of staff, Wilkerson says that war between the U.S. and Iran would be 10 to 15 times as costly in terms of finances and casualties as was the invasion of Iraq, which still hasn't ended, still hasn't been finally fully resolved in that region. And who is the big winner from the invasion of Iraq? Not the United States, certainly not the Iraqis. It was Iran, which has increased its influence throughout the region and especially in Iraq. So that's what we're up against here. You've got madmen in the United States who are looking for an excuse for an invasion of Iran. Now we can talk about there really are two historical models for what's happening. One that is not being discussed in the United States right now is what happened with Japan in 1941. Why did Japan unleash the war against the United States? But you have to realize that, the United States thinks the war began at Pearl Harbor. But it wasn't just Pearl Harbor that the Japanese hit on December 7th, 1941. They also invaded numerous countries that day, Burma, Malaya, and lots of others, and even actually attacked in some of them before it attacked at Pearl Harbor. It's a history that's little remembered in the United States. And what provoked them to attack the United States? That insane action that was going to have such long-term negative consequences was that the United States had imposed sanctions against Iran, was embargoing oil, preventing Iran from getting oil shipments, as well as heavy metals and other materials that they needed. And, would the United States do this for good reason? Yes and no. They did it to punish Japan for its invasion and occupation of China, which was a terrible thing that was going on there by the Japanese, who were trying to create an empire in Southeast Asia and elsewhere in Asia to parallel the European empires throughout much of the world that the Europeans had. And so the United States embargoes, because the Japanese were cutting off economic access to parts of China to the United States. And so the Americans were upset about that. We embargo oil and other supplies to Japan. Japan is desperate to get oil from the Dutch East Indies. In order to do that, they decided they had to knock out the American fleet that was housed at Pearl Harbor. So they attacked at Pearl Harbor. So that's very similar. So we're backing Iran into a similar corner now, and the Iranians could possibly have been behind this because they want to show the United States that they can retaliate in that region to the American provocations and what the United States is doing to Iran's economy today. So that's one historical model that we can use as an example. The other is false flag operations. They're called false flags because in the old days of wooden ships, countries would fly the flag of a different country in order to fake an invasion, in order to create the impression that another country is doing the invading, to mislead the first country or mislead the world as to who's really responsible. We have a history of false flag operations, not just the United States. These go back a long way in history. In 1931, when the Japanese created the Mukden incident in Manchuria. Many people trace the start of World War II to 1931 and the Japanese invasion of Manchuria. Well, they created a false flag incident there, made it look like the Japanese were involved in that attack on the Manchurian railroads. It was actually make it look like the Chinese were doing that when it was actually the Japanese. And that was the excuse for an invasion of China back in 1931. It heats up in 1937 with the massacre, the Nanjing massacre in 1937, but it really begins in 1931. There are lots of examples of this. One of the ones that I like to point to is in 1962, when the United States was conducting Operation Mongoose, its plan for terrorism, creation of chaos, and an invasion of Cuba. Operation Mongoose was headed by Lansdale. So Ed Lansdale was in charge of Operation Mongoose, and he asked the Joint Chiefs and the intelligence community for pretexts that they could use for an invasion of Cuba. And so they came up with a series of pretexts. These pretexts were false flag operations that were approved by the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Fortunately, President Kennedy rejected them. They included, and this was approved by the Joint Chiefs of Staff, they included what they called a sinking of the Maine operation. The Spanish-American War began in 1898 when the battleship Maine exploded in Havana Harbor. The United States said the Spanish blew it up. We later found out that it was a boiler that exploded. The Spanish were not involved in that, but McKinley used that as the pretext for going to war against Spain in 1898, start of the American Empire. Well, number one was a sinking of the Maine or battleship Maine pretext that we would blow up a ship, an American ship in Havana Harbor or in that region and blame it on the Cubans. That was number one. Number two, we would blow up an American plane and blame that on the Cubans. Number three, we would blow up an American airliner. They said that it could be college students coming back from a holiday that the U.S. would blow it up and blame it on Cuba. That was number three. Number four, we would blow up some boats with refugees fleeing Cuba and blame that on Cuba. Number five, we would conduct operations in the American base at Guantanamo, which is inside of Cuba, that the United States took after the 1898 Spanish-American War. And the United States would conduct operations inside there and say that the Cubans were attacking us inside Guantanamo. This was a series of provocations that the United States would be conducting that we would blame on the Cubans. And they were approved by the Joint Chiefs of Staff unanimously. So this kind of thing goes on all the time. How does the United States escalate in Vietnam. The United States, in August of 1964, the United States has two ships in the Gulf of Tonkin, the Maddox and the Turner Joy, and we said that they were attacked by the North Vietnamese. What was really going on? There had been an incident earlier. The United States conducted an operation which we denied, bombing North Vietnam or attacking it with these boats there. And so then we claimed that the North Vietnamese had retaliated against these American ships. We got some report from the captain of one of the ships saying that they were under attack. But within an hour, the captain was reporting back saying, we don't really know what's happening. It's very unclear. We should not take any retaliatory action. However, McNamara, Secretary of Defense McNamara, and President Johnson, looking for an excuse to escalate, claimed that the North Vietnamese, without provocation, were attacking U.S. ships in the region. And using that as an excuse, they began the escalation of the war in Vietnam. And so, but in that, again, phony bases. If we look throughout history, from 1898 on, false intelligence and lies have been used to get the United States involved in almost every war the United States has been involved in. And so, I mean, that's what we were up against. The most clear-cut recent case, of course, was the U.S. invasion of Iraq in 2003. The idea that there was weapons of mass destruction. Colin Powell, the most trusted member of the Bush administration, was deliberately deployed to the United Nations to make the case for war. Powell was up there for 75 minutes, one lie after another. Powell later said that it was the low point in his career, and it was. He's got a few other low points too. But clearly the United States used that as the basis for war. And who supports the United States now in his charges against Iran, saying that Iran's behind it? The British. Who supported the United States in the invasion of Iraq in 2003? The British. So this is, who do you trust? Does Iran have a motive to do this? Possibly they've got a motive, but it's a suicidal motive. Because and is there intelligence to prove that the Iranians have done this? The intelligence is very murky at best and can't be trusted because it's being put forth by two regimes that can't be trusted. So that's the situation we're in. But we are very close to war, and war in that region will be catastrophic. So what is the United States going to do? Hit back against the military asset? Now they want to hit back against the forces that had shot down the American drone? A limited response. Well, what do the Iranians do? They also have their hardliners. They also have people who want to go to war, who think that they can prevail in a war against the United States in the region if it's a limited operation there. So you got crazies on both sides, and these things can easily escalate. There are many places they can hit the Americans. The United States also said, just a couple of days ago, that if an American is killed anywhere by the Iranians, that will be a casus belli. That will be a pretext for war. So if an American is killed in a strike in Iraq, where the United States has troops, or, the United States has troops in Syria, and the Iranians also have troops in Syria. And not only if an Iranian does it, but if an Iranian proxy does it, or if an Iranian ally does it. So you've got people who want war, who can so easily now provoke a war through 100 different kinds of scenarios. So we are sitting on a powder keg. This is a very, very, very dangerous situation, the most dangerous situation in the world now. We've got others. We still have the Korean Peninsula. We still have India and Pakistan. We've got a number of situations that can unravel very, very quickly. But this one really is on the precipice of war.